Make sure your insurance doesn't come up short. Get gap cover with ALA. For more information, follow the links in the description. Hello everybody. 27 years ago, a small team of dedicated and passionate engineers of BMW came together to create one of the most unusual cars in the firm's history. Something that at its launch in 1998 was met with mockery from the general public on account of its looks, but which I think possesses that most unusual of traits in a German car: personality. And that is just one of the reasons why today I'm going to be making the case for this, the BMW M Coupe, as my favourite Beamer of the last 3 decades. Controversial? Perhaps, but perhaps not. Why do I think that? Well, find out in today's episode of JayEmm on Cars. If you have clicked on this video, there's a good chance you're a petrol head, and if so, I'm sure you're familiar with the BMW Z3, their roadster of the mid to late 1990s and early noughties, perhaps best known for being the transport of one Mr. Bond, James Bond. Remember it? He drove it in GoldenEye, not for too long, but he did drive it. That was the first of a trio of films in which BMW gave themselves some rather magnificent product placement. For its follow-up, Tomorrow Never Dies, he had the remote control 7 Series, and then, in The World Is Not Enough, he had a Z8, which met a rather unfortunate end. But enough about them. I'm here to talk to you about this, the M Coupe. Known mostly to its fans as the Z3M Coupe, officially it was never called that, instead simply known as the M Coupe. But because there was a later Z4 based car, you'll forgive me if I call it, as everybody else does, the Z3M. Now, the Z3 itself was already a little bit of a departure for BMW, and a car that I think many purists looked at and said, ugh, no, not for me, thank you very much. Although today I think it's actually got a fair bit of appeal, I can see also why it didn't, if for no other reason than when it launched, it just didn't have the engine that people expected of a BMW. This is a brand associated with mighty straight sixes, and for their sports car offering, they gave it a fairly anemic 4. Later on, they did fix things, and of course, there was inevitably an M version too. That landed in 1997. Now, I've never actually had the chance to drive a Z3M Roadster, but if it's anything like the regular Z3, it'll be a wobbly old affair. And I'm fairly sure that BMW's own engineers knew this too, because a small group of them got together and went to the board with their idea for an M Coupe, a car based on the Z3M Roadster, but with a hard body that would sort the car's lack of structural rigidity. And in order to convince the powers that be to back the project, they managed to persuade them that building it wasn't going to cost a fortune. And so this car reuses a lot from the regular Z3M Roadster. In fact, just about everything from the doors forward is identical. Underneath, you've also got virtually the same underpinnings, so there's lots of E36 Evo M3 in here, including its S50 engine, S52 for the US market with a little bit less power, and an E30 derived rear axle with semi-trailing arm suspension, on account of the fact that apparently the E36's somewhat more advanced setup just wouldn't fit. This European market S50 engine displaces 3.2 litres, has 6 cylinders in a row, is naturally aspirated, and makes 316 horsepower and 260 pounds-feet of torque. That's 350 newton-meters. The red line is at a healthy 7,600 RPM, and all that power is sent naturally to just the rear wheels via a 5-speed ZF manual gearbox and a limited slip differential. This is a proper old school recipe for performance. There isn't even traction control. There is, though, air conditioning, which I'm grateful for today. It's actually starting to warm up a bit now. And I have to say, one of the reasons that I've always loved these cars is the little old school retro touches, like the chrome surrounding the dials, the light switch over here, and this little trio of gauges for your time and your temperature, both outside and for the oil. Now, don't forget, if today's video inspires you to head towards the classifieds in search of your perfect old-school Beamer, to make sure to use CarVertical, the super-powered super search that cross-references a number of databases from around the globe to give you lots of very useful information on any potential used car purchase. It takes just 60 seconds, requires only a registration number or a VIN, and for 20% off the service, don't forget to use my discount code JayEmm. Now, this is not my first encounter with an M Coupe. I actually drove a later example with the E46 generation S54 engine a few years ago, courtesy of a lovely chap called Lorenzo. And I remember it being an absolutely fabulous car. In fact, I recall that I thought it was a much, much better fit for me than the Z4 M Coupe, which I previously owned. That was a very difficult affair. Hard to love, but then at the moment you thought you were going to sell it and you decided to beat the heck out of it on a back road, it ascended to the brilliance that the rest of the time it lacked. The Z3M is a very, very different character. This one has come to the channel courtesy of my good friend Christian over at Heel & Toe Cars. He has it up for sale on behalf of one of his customers, and it looks absolutely gorgeous in this Imola red, more specifically Imola Rot 2. It also sits on gorgeous, correct 17-inch wheels, and I actually rather like the way that they've been finished. Normally I wouldn't, but they really suit this. Inside, I also appreciate the little touches of red leather that do really help to liven the cabin, and it's currently sat on just shy of 94,000 miles, which for a car that rolled out of the factory in September of 1998 isn't all that bad. It is also a car that in a great many ways seems tailor-made for somebody like myself. You see, I have no children, not at the moment anyway, and so, for the most part, I don't really need back seats, certainly not in what I consider to be my daily. But what I do need is a decent amount of boot space, and it just so happens that the rear in this is the perfect size to fit my filming kit. In fact, my main camera bag, which is the size of a regular airline carry-on, fits absolutely precisely in the back. You can get two side by side, and I'm sure that is no accident. And those who do know their Z3s will have, I'm sure, spotted the fact that this one isn't entirely standard. It's wearing a few items from the AC Schnitzer catalogue. So you've got a carbon fibre front splitter that I am somewhat terrified of scraping, but haven't yet. There's also a nice little Delta Integrale-esque rear spoiler and a bespoke diffuser too. The exhaust also looks to me to be non-standard, although it doesn't sound particularly fruity, so perhaps somebody's just changed the tips or something like that. In either case, Christian didn't tell me that that was non-standard. The suspension is, apparently it's the well-known Bilstein something-somethings, or at least that's what we could get out of the owner, and that may be why it sits quite so flush. Gorgeous fitment, this thing. Although, I do think the suspension requires a little bit of tinkering. However, it is the suspension of this car which gave me the biggest surprise, because if you're familiar with just about any modern day BMW, including some from around when this car was made, they tend to be a little bit too firm. Certainly something that I could say about the later Z3M Coupe, also the E46 M3, and a number of other BMWs over the years too. On nice, flat, smooth German tarmac, they're probably fine, but here in Britain, not so much. This thing though, it just has an incredible suppleness that's been lost from not just BMWs, but an awful lot of cars over the last few decades. And it means that across some of my absolute favourite pieces of road, it rides beautifully. And it's no doubt got something to do with the fact that it's sat on relatively small wheels by modern standards, just 17 inches, and they're wrapped in Continental Sport Contact tyres, which are fairly new, 225 wide at the front, 245 at the back. In spite of that, traction hasn't been a problem. It's actually pretty nice today. It's about 10 degrees out there, but even so, I figured giving it the big one in first or second, it might be a little bit leery. However, it hasn't been at all. Instead, it has at all times remained utterly and totally composed, and it's an absolute joy. It's also very compact, both narrow and not too long, meaning that for little tight narrow country lanes like this, with just about every OAP about apparently decided to go for a drive, it's fine. If anything, and this might sound weird, and it feels weird, the weak point of the package might actually be the engine. I'm not actually sure I've driven anything with the S50 lump in it before. I've driven plenty with the later S54, but the truth is that when they made the change, they kind of neutered the S54. In the M3, the E46 generation, that made about 340 horsepower. Here, just 321. So only about 5 more than the S50 that it replaced. And that change, I believe, was made chiefly for emissions. Though there is another school of thought which says it was done deliberately to stop this from outperforming the then newer E46 M3. You see, this car only weighs 1,400 kilos, so it's already a fair bit lighter than an M3. This might also be the reason why they never gave it the 6-speed gearbox that the M3 got. This instead kept with the 5-speed ZF for the entirety of its life. And I originally thought that was for reasons of packaging, but apparently not only is there the space for one of those gearboxes in this car, the mounting points are there too. However, the real difference between the two is the 6th gear, which was simply an overdrive. The 1st through 5th ratios are identical for both boxes, meaning that, on the road, performance should be identical. And let's see what it's like. Oh yes, that's a proper BMW. Now, when I drove this car earlier, I thought it felt just a little bit lacking in terms of punch, but the more I've driven it, the better it's got. I don't think this has actually done all that many miles recently, and when I got it, it didn't want to idle all that happily. I think simply because it had old fuel in it. I've now given it half a tank of V-Power, and I think it appreciates it. Regardless, here, the interaction between man and machine is absolutely brilliant. The gearbox is good, which is a rarity for a BMW. Whether you're going up through the box or down, it's a joy. And the performance is usable on the road, but not overwhelming. No clutch delay valve in here, I think. I'm still not going to take liberties with it on account of that lack of traction control, and if it does go wrong, it might go wrong in a fairly big way, but I can still carry more than enough pace with it and enjoy myself. This thing is awesome. The steering's actually not too bad, not particularly feelsome. A Mazda MX-5 is better, but in the context of many other BMWs, it's pretty good. Now sure, over the years there have been a lot of other very cool iconic BMWs, E46 M3, but I've done a lot of pieces on why exactly it is that I just don't love that anywhere near as much as everybody else. The mighty V10 E60 M5, which is also an awesome thing and a cool piece of automotive history, but it's a big fast saloon car. There are loads of those out there. The E63 M6, meanwhile, I've still yet to drive. If someone's got one, please, can I have a go? I've always lusted after one. And you can get one for less than one of these. But not just compared with its BMW siblings, but the wider German and other car world as a whole, this does stand out as something a little bit different. The later Z4M is probably the much prettier car, but this, by contrast, is far more distinctive and interesting. It does have that skunkworks vibe about it. And the good thing with Z3M Coupes, they never got filthy cheap, unlike the regular Z3, which even today doesn't command all that much money. No, these were always a little bit different, partly because they're an enthusiast car, but partly because they're just so damn rare. Very, very few people were convinced by them when they were new. Now in Europe, these might not seem anywhere near as rare as they are here, because there they did get a coupe version of the regular Z3. We never did. So then, how much are we talking exactly? Well, prices vary. If you want to get yourself into a Z3M Roadster, which, like I said, I've not sampled, so I can't tell you with any accuracy how good or bad it is, then you can get one of those from about £10,000. The cheapest one of these, though, is closer to 25. This example is up for sale at 26. Now, cosmetically, it does need a little bit of work, and that's one of the reasons for the fairly attractive price. But I think this would make a great basis for somebody to buy and either use as an interesting daily, which I think I would, or as something to put away for high days and holidays. For you and someone special, this is the perfect car to go out in. And in fact, today I'm filming a video with this not just for myself, but also with my good buddy Ant for JayEmm and Friends. You see, he's got thinking recently that maybe he should add a classic car to his stable. He took the 550 out the other day and loved it. This can be had for about a third the price, and though I wouldn't tell anybody these will be cheap to run, it's an old BMW M car after all, they'll certainly be cheaper than an old Ferrari. Seeing this go down the road earlier was absolutely magnificent. And just doing this stuff, it's great. You don't even get that much road noise. It's pretty well insulated in here. This is such a cool car. And yeah, there are still people out there that mock it, call it the Clownshoe. But it's no joke. This thing is awesome. And it's different. You recognize it instantly. And how many BMWs can you say that for? Not many. Those big arches, necessitated by that wide track, compared with this distinctive body style, they give it kind of baby Ferrari FF vibes. There's not really anything wrong with that, is there? Why then haven't I bought one? Well, I've already got a couple of two-seater coupes with a nice big boot. And though I am really very tempted by this, now unfortunately is not the time for me to be buying a frivolous car. I need to get something sensible, like the L405 Range Rover that I borrowed from Christian a couple of weeks ago. Now the sun is out though, all of a sudden thoughts of buying a Range Rover have perished from my mind, and that little devil on my shoulder is saying, get one of these, they're really good. Will they go up in value over the next few years? Probably not. But I don't think they'll go down. And at the end of the day, they're a bit different, they're cool, and they don't disappoint to drive. And so for all those reasons and more, the Z3M Coupe, it just hits a sweet spot that I think very few other BMWs ever have. And that's why this gets my vote for the best Beamer of the last 3 decades. Anyway, I want to say a big thank you to Christian for lending me his car, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.